The moment I walked into the law office, I knew something was off. The air felt heavy, charged like the calm before a storm. I took a seat at the long mahogany table, my hands clenched in my lap. My father and I had a complicated relationship, so I hadn't expected much from his will. I was only here out of respect. Across from me, my cousin Derek lounged in his chair, exuding smug confidence. He was dressed sharply, wearing an expensive suit and a watch that gleamed under the fluorescent lights. That was my first clue. Derek had never had money. The lawyer, Mr. Grant, cleared his throat. "Thank you for coming. As you know, Mr. Porter's estate will be distributed according to his wishes. Before we begin, are there any questions?" I stayed silent, but Derek smirked. "Nah, no questions. Let's just get on with it." Something was wrong. As Mr. Grant read the will, my stomach twisted. My father had left behind a significant estate to be split between me and Derek. But as the lawyer continued, Derek's smirk widened, his confidence growing. Then came the bombshell. The inheritance had already been distributed to Derek 6 months before my father's passing, per his request. Derek burst into laughter. "Oh, man, I was wondering when you'd hear about that." He wiped a fake tear. "Yeah, I already got the money and spent it, so good luck getting anything." I stared at him, ice creeping through my veins. But Mr. Grant wasn't fazed. Instead, he smiled. Then he slid a folder across the table. "Actually," he said, "you might want to read this first." I reached for the folder, my hands slightly trembling. Derek, still lounging in his chair with that smug grin, scoffed. "What's that? Some legal nonsense? The money's already mine." Ignoring him, I opened the folder. Inside, I found a letter in my father's familiar handwriting. My heart pounded as I began to read. "My dear son, if you're reading this, then you now know about the inheritance. I'm sure Derek thinks he's won, but there's something he doesn't know. I had my suspicions about him, so I made sure to put safeguards in place. I hope this brings you the justice you deserve." Beneath the letter were several legal documents and financial statements. My father had quietly conducted an investigation into Derek months before his passing. What he found was shocking. Derek had manipulated him, forging signatures, and convincing him to transfer assets under false pretenses. However, my father had caught on, just in time. The final document in the folder was a court order freezing all of Derek's assets until further notice. I glanced up at Derek. His smirk faltered. What is that?" Mr. Grant adjusted his glasses. "It seems Mr. Porter was well aware of your actions, Derek. He filed a fraud complaint before his passing. The court has already ruled in favor of reversing the transactions. That means," he turned to me, "the assets rightfully belong to you." Derek shot forward in his chair, his face turning red. "That's ridiculous. My uncle wanted me to have the money. This is a setup." Mr. Grant remained unfazed. "The documents prove otherwise." I took a deep breath, my mind reeling. My father had known. Despite our complicated relationship, he had looked out for me until the very end. Derek slammed his fists on the table. "This isn't over!" I stood, gathering the documents. "Yes, it is." As I walked out of the office, the weight that had pressed on me for so long finally lifted. Justice had been served, not just for me, but for my father's legacy. The air in the room felt thick with tension. Derek sat across from me, his expression shifting between fury and disbelief. His fingers tapped anxiously against the polished oak table. For the first time since this battle over my father's inheritance began, he looked uncertain. "I don't believe this," he muttered under his breath. "This is a mistake." Mr. Grant, the family lawyer, remained composed as he slid another document toward Derek. "There is no mistake. Your fraudulent activities have been exposed, and the court has ruled accordingly. The assets are being transferred back immediately." I watched as Derek's face paled. He flipped through the pages frantically, his jaw tightening. The weight of his deception was finally sinking in. "You think this is fair?" he snapped, slamming the papers down. "After everything I've done, after how much I've sacrificed?" I met his glare, my voice steady. "Sacrificed? You lied, manipulated, and stole from a man who trusted you. That wasn't a sacrifice, Derek. That was greed." His fists clenched at his sides. "You don't understand. I deserved this more than you did. He never saw you as worthy. I was the one who stood by him." I exhaled, shaking my head. "And yet, in the end, he saw you for what you were." Derek let out a bitter laugh. "You think this makes you the winner? That you've proven something?" I pushed my chair back and stood, gathering the documents. This was never about winning. It was about doing what was right. As I turned to leave, Derek's voice dropped to a low growl. "You'll regret this." I paused but didn't look back. "Maybe, but at least I won't regret who I've become." Stepping out of the office, I felt the weight of the past months slowly lift. Justice had prevailed, not just for me, but for my father's memory. The battle was over, and for the first time in a long time, I could finally move forward. The morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of my father's study, casting golden hues across the room. I stood by the heavy wooden desk, running my fingers over its smooth surface, tracing the faint scratches that time had left behind. This was where he spent countless hours, immersed in thought, shaping the empire he built from nothing. And now, it was mine. The weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders, heavier than I had imagined. Taking over his legacy was not just about inheriting wealth. It was about preserving the values he had instilled in me, about proving that I was capable of leading with the same integrity and vision. A soft knock on the door pulled me from my thoughts. Amanda, my father's longtime assistant, stepped in, holding a neatly organized folder. "These are the final documents, ready for your signature," she said, placing them in front of me. "Once signed, the transition will be official." I picked up the pen, hesitating for just a moment. It wasn't doubt that held me back, but the realization that this was a defining moment. With a deep breath, I signed my name, watching as the ink dried. Solid, unwavering. Amanda smiled gently. "He would have been proud of you." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I hope so." The door opened again, and Mason stepped in, his expression unreadable. "So it's done?" I turned to him and nodded. "It's done." He studied me for a long moment, before finally speaking. "You know, he never doubted you. No matter what Derek said, he always believed you had what it took." A mixture of relief and sadness filled my chest. I wish he had told me that himself. Mason gave me a knowing look. He showed it in his own way. I glanced around the study once more, memories flooding back, the quiet moments of him lost in thought, the rare, warm smiles when he was proud. This was his world, and now it was mine to protect. As I stepped out of the study, a new sense of determination took hold. This wasn't just about keeping his legacy intact. It was about shaping it into something even greater. I was ready. The wind howled outside, rattling the tall windows of the estate as I sat in my father's leather armchair, staring at the thick stack of documents before me. The weight of his legacy pressed down on my shoulders, heavier than ever. The empire he had built, piece by piece, deal by deal, was now in my hands. But with it came an overwhelming sense of responsibility. Amanda, ever efficient, stood nearby, her expression calm yet expectant. "You don't have to decide everything today," she reminded me gently, "but the board is waiting for your direction." I exhaled slowly, my fingers tightening around the pen. Just a few weeks ago, I had been standing in his shadow, uncertain of my place. Now, there was no room for doubt. I flipped through the papers, scanning legal jargon and financial reports, each page a testament to my father's meticulous planning. He had prepared for this moment long before I had even considered it a possibility. A soft knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Mason entered, his usual air of quiet confidence tempered by something more cautious. He leaned against the desk, watching me. "They're all waiting to see what you'll do next," he said. "Derek included." The mention of Derek made my stomach tighten. My uncle had never hidden his belief that I was unfit to take over. He had always been a looming presence, doubting, challenging, waiting for me to fail, but I couldn't afford to let his skepticism define me. "I know," I said, keeping my voice steady, "and I won't let them control the narrative." Mason nodded approvingly. "Good, because the moment you hesitate, they'll see it as weakness." I picked up the pen again, this time without hesitation, signing my name with steady strokes. The ink dried quickly, marking the official transition of power. I belonged here, not because I had inherited this empire, but because I had earned it. Amanda smiled. "It's done." A knock on the window made us all turn. Outside, Mira stood by her car, watching me with an unreadable expression. The storm had started to pick up, raindrops streaking the glass. I stood, grabbing my coat. Mason raised an eyebrow. "You're going out in this?" I glanced at him. "There's something I need to take care of." As I stepped outside, the cold rain hit my skin, sharp and bracing. Mira didn't move, waiting as I approached. This moment wasn't just about business. It was about more than that. About choices, about the future. And I was finally ready to face it. The rain had slowed to a light drizzle by the time I reached Mira. She stood by her car, arms crossed, her dark eyes scanning my face for answers I wasn't sure I could give. "You made your decision," she said, her voice even. It wasn't a question. I nodded. "I had to." She looked away, exhaling softly. "I know. And I know this world isn't easy. But I need to understand. Where does that leave us?" Her words hit harder than I expected. Mira had been my anchor through the chaos, the one person who saw me beyond the name, beyond the expectations. But in claiming my father's legacy, had I unknowingly pushed her away? I took a step closer. "I don't want to lose you." She let out a quiet laugh, shaking her head. "That's not an answer." I hesitated. Could I balance both, power and love? Or was one always meant to overshadow the other? Before I could respond, her phone buzzed. A brief glance at the screen, and her expression hardened. "I have to go," she said. "This conversation isn't over." I watched as she got into her car and drove off, her taillights disappearing into the night. The estate loomed behind me, waiting. I had won the battle for my father's empire. But at what cost? Life has a way of testing our choices, forcing us to weigh ambition against the people who matter most. Power, wealth, and success may seem fulfilling, but they often come at a price. True strength isn't just about winning battles. It's about knowing what truly deserves to be fought for. Relationships, trust, and love are fragile, and once broken, they aren't always easy to mend. In the end, no empire, no victory, is worth losing those who stand by us. The greatest lesson is learning to balance ambition with loyalty, ensuring that success doesn't come at the cost of our own humanity.